An Xbox is something you connect your TV to play video games. And Microsoft first came out with Xbox in 2001. They're now out with the third version of it, which ironically is called Xbox One. So it's been around, almost 15 years. Actually, the average age would shock you is probably around 30 years old. So it's actually played by young and old. And I think the biggest thing people miss about video games is it's very social. So people are playing online with other people. So think of it as a social network, just like you would find on Facebook or anything like that, where you meet people, you play, people meet on the couch and have fun together. It's a great community and family thing. So there's a very high degree of social activity that takes place with it. There's also obviously things like coordination, cognitive recognition, strategic development. So there's a lot of these games are strategy games where you have to think about how to compete with somebody else. And there's an element of competition in video games that I think is healthy. Yeah, I think video games has a little bit of a historic rap for being young kids by themselves playing in the bedroom with a video game. And in fact, what has happened is now video games are in the main room in the house. There's lots of people playing because of the online connection, the internet, and gaming services like Xbox Live. People all across the world. My son lived for 3 years in Europe and played games with all his friends in the United States the whole time. So the book is called Xbox Revisited, and what it offers to you as a reader is first the story of Xbox, which is just an interesting story, and how it was created and what happened inside Microsoft as we were building it. So there's an interesting storyline. The second thing it will give you is a strategic framework for thinking about complex problems. So I call this the 3P framework: purpose, principles, and priorities. And it basically says that if you have a complex problem, could be a professional problem, could be a personal challenge, could be something you're doing with a nonprofit, how do you attack that problem? And basically the framework says you have to decide what your purpose is, establish the 4 or 5 principles you're going to use to attack that problem, and then figure out the 5 priorities or actions you're going to take to solve that problem and achieve your purpose. Very common sense, but remarkably not used often. And we learned this through the Xbox business. And so in the process of telling the Xbox story, I talk about this strategic framework. Well, that's the interesting twist in the story. The third aspect of Xbox Revisited is that it applies that same strategic framework to civic issues. So what's going on in government, state, local, federal, what's going on in your local nonprofits and community organizations, what's going on in your schools, all the things that form the fabric of how our communities work and operate. And my premise is that all these complex, snarly problems that we struggle to deal with, if we took stepped back a little bit, took a little bit more careful thought about the strategic framework we'd apply to them, the problems would become more manageable. It's sort of a funny thing, but complex problems require more simplistic solutions. Sometimes I feel like I should, but I got to get them to read them first. So hopefully they'll watch this and then decide that they want to get a copy. I don't know him super well. I've met him. I spent about an hour with him once a long time ago. So I don't know his management style super well. He doesn't come across as a super structured, disciplined thinker. He comes across a little bit more as somebody who sees a problem and reacts to it. That's just the way he comes across, certainly on the television. But I'm a little hesitant to say, because you kind of have to get to know somebody to really understand. I think any candidate could benefit. So I think if you look across all the candidates, they're all struggling with, how do I communicate solutions to these complex problems? And for me, something like the 3P framework is an easy way to communicate that to people. Take an issue like immigration. What is our purpose? And until a candidate says, this is my purpose in thinking about immigration, it's very hard to know how to evaluate them. And so I think as a way for people to establish their credibility and communicate where they stand on issues, it could be a valuable approach. Well, I think the funny thing to think about is the connection between video games and civics. And it's not a common connection. And the thing I always tell people is, the things we learn in our professional lives, we can in fact apply in our civic lives. My professional life happened to be in video games, and I ran that business. But I learned some things that I now apply in my civic life. And I'd like everybody, you, me, our presidential candidates, to become civic engineers, people who are engaged in civic action and civic activity. And if more people were involved, I think we'd have a little bit better outcome.